who came along to support that, and everybody who volunteered to make it such a great success. We had, I think, somewhere around 250 people come along. So it's sort of a growing event for us. Perhaps not quite as big as our Harvest Festival event, but it's another example of how we want to share God's love with our local community, the people around us. And again, just as Alison was sharing there, thank you for your generosity, not just in volunteering and putting in so many hours of your time into making this church community what it is, but also the financial giving that makes events like that possible. So thank you so much. We're in a series at the moment called The Culture of Christmas, and we're looking at, as our Advent series, various sort of popular cultural aspects of Christmas that have become perhaps a very normal part of our lives. And we're exploring different elements each week. Christmas is a cultural phenomenon, right? I mean, it's a Christ Mass. It's a celebration of the birth of Christ. But originally, it wasn't that big a deal as a religious festival, certainly not as big as festivals like Easter and other ones. Started off as quite a small religious festival, and it was layered over the top of a lot of pagan practices back in the early centuries. Because a lot of it occurs at a time of year where we're celebrating the birth of the sun as humanity, the winter solstice. And there was sort of a correlation there between the birth of the sun, S-U-N, and the birth of the son, S-O-N, Son of God. And it seemed like that whole concept of light coming into darkness was a great time to celebrate Christmas. So a lot of those pagan rituals and traditions kind of got interwoven with a lot of the Christmas traditions. So for instance, we have things like Christmas trees, right? Which Christmas trees were sort of Nordic fertility symbols, that sense of evergreen light, everlasting life. The trees would be decorated. The concept of wassailing, I don't know if anybody's ever done any wassailing, which kind of correlates in some ways to our tradition of caroling. Wassailing would be where you go into the orchards and sing to the trees and drive out the evil spirits because you're wanting a good harvest of apples the next year. I'm doubting many of you have done that specifically, right? But that's led, I mean, for some people to from the Christian tradition to look down on some of those Christmas traditions, things that have become Christmas traditions because they have kind of pagan roots. But when you think about it, in one sense, that's the whole point of Christmas. Christmas is a celebration of the incarnation. I mean, it's not really a celebration of Jesus's birthday in the sense that we would celebrate birthdays, right? Jesus was most likely not born on December the 24th. When you look at the Christmas stories, probably Jesus was born perhaps around late spring or early fall, just looking at some of the traditions there. We don't know that for sure, of course, but there's no reason to say Jesus was born on December the 25th. So it's not a birthday in that sense. We're celebrating something much, much bigger. It's incarnation. It's God and humanity coming together. It's God with us. And so that incarnation is God coming into our humanity and saying this humanity is good. And so, the Christmas traditions aren't, I think, just to be thrown away. And there's a reason why those Christmas traditions resonate with us. There's a reason, I think, why some of them have become so powerful in our culture. And that's somewhat what we're exploring through this series. Now, today, we're looking at different movies, poems, books, stories. And today we're going to look at a book called Letters from Father Christmas. I think we have this is the first edition of Letters from Father Christmas by Tolkien, and he's a very famous author. This is not one of his more famous books. This is not a first edition, but this is my copy. I got this in 2004, I think, and it's a book full of the letters that Tolkien wrote to his children. He had 4 kids. Began writing these letters in 1920 from Father Christmas. Now, I'm not imagining that. Has anybody read Letters from Father Christmas? That's how prevalent in the culture it is, right? So I'm feeling a little exposed here. No, I wouldn't imagine that this is all that famous a book in our culture. But Father Christmas is, right, or Santa Claus, as he's known in North America. and make of it what you want, a good and a bad of all that, right? And everybody has opinions on Santa Claus, but it's Santa Claus has become an icon, a personification, if you like, of Christmas. Now, Father Christmas, which is like, I grew up calling Santa Claus Father Christmas. That was just what everybody called Father Christmas in England. And the tradition of Father Christmas is a little different to Santa Claus, although those two things have become amalgamated. But the tradition of Father Christmas is one of those pagan things that I was talking about. I think I've got an old picture here. Here's a really old depiction of Father Christmas. This is black and white, but generally Father Christmas was dressed in green, which sort of represents that evergreen, everlasting life, fertility. Maybe not go on too quickly here, but just go back. Crown of holly on his head, the Yule log on his back, sort of representing the more Germanic tradition of Yuletide. And he's a personification of Christmas that was really not associated with gifts or anything like that, but really the more along the pagan lines of celebrating the winter solstice. That evolved over the years, and he became a more elaborate character. And maybe we can look at the next slide here. And this, did anybody recognize that picture at all? Yep. Yeah, it's the Ghost of Christmas Present. So some people think that really the depiction, the description, Dickens' description of the Ghost of Christmas Present in A Christmas Carol and the various artistic depictions of that are based on the ancient tradition of Father Christmas. And you can see again here, I'm not sure about the chest there really, because Father Christmas when I was a kid, never bared his chest in sort of Freddie Mercury style or anything like that. But it's a nice gown, and you see the depiction of plenty around him. It's sort of a celebration, a feast. It's reveling in the goodness of this time of year. So that Father Christmas evolved slowly and continually, and then was very influenced by the Santa Claus tradition, which is more of a North American, with its origins in Europe, but more of a North American. The sort of backstory of Santa Claus, maybe we can go on to the next one, is of course Saint Nicholas, 4th century Turkish saint, who was renowned for giving gifts, for generosity, and actually giving gifts in secret. There was that sort of sense of, what Jesus taught about, don't just, give so people can see what a good person you are, but do things in secret, which kind of perhaps, alludes to the idea of Santa Claus coming in secret and leaving gifts. Perhaps that's a connection there. But this tradition became more embellished in Europe over the centuries, and then we have the character of Sinterklaas, who came from. So this is sort of a Dutch import or an American import from Holland of this character, sort of based on Saint Nicholas, but you can see beginning to look a little bit more like Santa Claus by now. And again, more evolutions of this through storytelling, through songs, through cultural commercials like Coca-Cola. I don't think Santa Claus was finally defined as being dressed in red until the Coca-Cola commercial in the early part of the 20th century. And maybe we can go on to the next slide. We end up then with the modern day depiction of Santa Claus, which then begins to influence the Father Christmas figure. And in England now, many people refer to Father Christmas now as Santa Claus. And those two things have come together. Here's a picture of Father Christmas now, and you can see how similar they look. One of the differences I think that prevails, though, is that Father Christmas somehow always has a hood and a cloak, not a hat and a cloak, a coat. I think that's really important. There's deep meaning, deep significance in that. So now, again, I think these traditions, the tradition of Father Christmas or Santa Claus, is received in different ways. Some people within religious circles, some people think it's really terrible. Some people are, it's a simple personification of Christmas that represents wonder and innocence and all the sort of beauty of what we're celebrating at this time of the year. If we look at the word, though, Santa, as has been well documented, it is actually an anagram of Satan. So, you've probably heard that before. I was told that as a kid a few times. But the good news is Father Christmas, the anagram of Father Christmas is starfish rematch, right? So what could be more innocent than a starfish, right? So let's go with Father Christmas along with Tolkien. Incidentally, that was the best anagram I could come up with from Father Christmas that wasn't a little obscene. So I thought we should keep it family friendly. Okay, well, let's get back to Tolkien and Letters from Father Christmas. Okay, so he wrote this book. Here's the first letter. I'm going to read it to you. He starts off writing in 1920. And he just has one child at that time, John. And let me read it to you. It's a very simple letter. Dear John, it's a Dear John letter. I heard you ask Daddy what I was like and where I live. I have drawn me and my house for you. Take care of the picture. I'm just off now for Oxford, where he lived, with my bundle of toys, some for you. Hope I shall arrive in time. The snow is very thick at the North Pole tonight. Your loving Father Christmas. So beautiful little, that's the first one, very simple, beautiful little letters. And they were accompanied by, I think, wonderful artwork, wonderful watercolors. Here's the first picture accompanying the first letter. This is from 1920s. You have a depiction of Father Christmas there, looking very Nordic, I think, which I think, obviously Tolkien was a professor of Old English and Nordic languages, and he was very influenced by, I think, that culture. And we have a little picture there at the bottom of, maybe at the bottom of the previous slide, yeah. That is his house. It's called Christmas House. Very creative name for it. That's where he lives at the North Pole. And some of these pictures are just really beautiful. And I'll put this this book out so you can flick through it. If you don't all fight over it, but you can flick through and just look at some of them. The letters were accompanied by, usually put in an envelope, and sometimes Tolkien would get the postman to deliver them. Sometimes they would just appear magically on the fire hearth. He would create stamps for them, and he was really going to town on all this. And something that this just makes me think about is, do you remember the days where we used to get letters? Wasn't that just fantastic? Like, I remember the first time I started using email, I thought that was magic. It was just incredible. I remember it was back when I was practicing medicine, and we suddenly were able to send off, if you had a child, discharged a child from the hospital, you could send an instantaneous report back to the general practitioner about what happened. Went off electronically, and I was just like, wow, this is magic. Now nothing really feels magical about email anymore. It feels like a burden. Whereas you get a letter in the mail with a real stamp on it and a handwritten envelope, not one of those fake junk mail ones, but a real one, especially if it's from another country, it feels like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. And actually in the discussions questions, or the Advent reflections this week, one of the suggestions for a practice to show love, which is our theme, Advent theme for this week, is to write a handwritten letter to somebody, stick a stamp on it and send it to them. Just let somebody know what you're thinking about them, if in a positive way. And maybe to somebody you haven't seen for ages, maybe somebody overseas. But there's something beautiful about receiving letters. And I think Tolkien taps into some of this kind of magic. He wrote over a period of years, starting with John when he was just 3 years old, and then he had other children, Michael, Christopher, who's renowned, sadly passed away now, but renowned for editing a lot of Tolkien's material after his death and producing things like the Silmarillion and a lot of the other literature that we get today. And then finally Priscilla, his daughter Priscilla, and he stops writing in 1943, and it's a kind of sad ending in some respects, because he's writing to Priscilla saying, yeah, I know you don't believe anymore. And that's okay. And this sort of the magic is thinning, as the expression probably would be. But there's some beautiful stories in there. There's the Great Polar Bear is Father Christmas's sidekick. And even on the letters, you'll get sort of little annotations. In fact, I think we've got another. So these letters get a lot more elaborate. The stories get a lot more elaborate. You can't necessarily see it on this particular letter, but the Great Polar Bear will add in little edits or annotations that are, when Father Christmas is criticizing the polar bear will say things like "not true," and there's some humor mixed in with it all. And there's some fantastic stories. So we've got a few pictures here that depict some of those stories. So in 1925, 5 years after he starts all this, the great polar bear climbs the North Pole. There is an actual pole at the North Pole. He climbs it, and it breaks, and he falls down and crashes into the house, and they have to move house. And they move to a place called Cliff House. So from then on, all the letters are from Cliff House. You see the moon there depicted, and there's a little story the following year, 1926, where the polar, I think we've got a picture of the next one. Yeah, so this is related to the Northern Lights. The polar bear sets off accidentally a bunch of fireworks that hit the moon, and the man in the moon falls out of the moon and lands near Father Christmas's new house, and they have to sort of nurse him back to health. A lot of fantasy involved here. But you can imagine kids receiving letters like this, right? And with pictures like this. And the polar bear, as part of this story, goes into this cave to turn on the tap that creates the aurora borealis, the northern lights, and accidentally turns on 2 days worth. And so you get this explosion of light. Not that one. Yes, explosion light. And that actually, if you look at it, but that's just a beautiful picture. Obviously not an accurate depiction of the Northern Lights, but a fantastical one. But the next picture that you were going to show there, Greg, yeah, so this is another story. I think this is from 1932, where the polar bear finds a hole in the side of a hill and goes in, and it's a cave, and he can smell goblins. And these goblins have stolen the Christmas presents, and there's this battle that ensues. And we get here sort of the embellishment of some of these characters that perhaps later appear in The Hobbit. Tolkien's writing The Hobbit around about this time of year, certainly writing a lot of his back mythology. And that if you've read The Hobbit, the idea of going into a hole in the side of a hill and going into a cave, that has obviously significance to that story. So you can see how even these letters, simple and innocent as they are, had some influence on Tolkien's later writings, or writings that were later published. And in fact, some people see some parallels between Father Christmas and Gandalf. Now, that might sound like heresy, I don't know, but it's who knows? Certainly this was a part of his life. So maybe we could hit the next slide, Greg. So what? Okay, so why are we talking about Father Christmas in the first place? Why are we talking about Tolkien's letters to Father Christmas? Well, I think Tolkien, in writing these letters to his children, he's capturing something of the spirit of Christmas, something that's, I think, really valuable. Again, we're looking at cultural norms. We're looking at cultural traditions that may not have had Christian origins necessarily, but that seem to resonate in our culture for a certain reason. And rather than dismissing those, we're exploring why. Why do they resonate? And how does the Christmas story, the story of Jesus coming into the world, how does that relate to the culture? So first of all, what we're actually seeing, if you read these letters, there's this sense of wonder, sense of that there's more to this world than meets the eye. There's magic in the world. There's things that we don't see, that we don't perhaps understand, that we can't logically explain. Now, here's Tolkien using story, legend, myth, however you want to describe it, to capture that. But isn't that something we all want to believe, that there's more to this life? We all want to believe that. I think humanity wants to believe that. And that's why we have all these stories, not just Christmas stories, but all kinds of stories that are reaching out for something more. He's tapping into innocence, the innocence of childhood. You could say that is, I suppose a dark way of looking at that is that it's tricking children into believing things. Honestly, I've tricked my children into believing all kinds of things. Every 4 years, I tell them that England are going to win the World Cup. It's never happened. No, but we do things, don't we? Like, I mean, is story, is fantasy, is all of that wrong? I'm not judging either side of that. But somehow he's tapping into the innocence of childhood that is full of wonder, and doesn't really have an ounce of cynicism or doubt, as in order to embrace that wonder, in order to embrace, I think what the next point would be, is hope, that there is hope. It's not just what we've got is what we're going to have for forever, that there's hope for the future. And what's, I think, really interesting is how even in these letters in 1939, the 1939 letter introduces the Second World War and references it and says that there's a backup, there's a supply problem with presents this year because of this awful war, he describes it as. And in the subsequent years, he addresses that too. And obviously, a lot of Tolkien's writings are about hope, about doing the right thing, doing in the present moment, being loving in the present moment, which is our last point here, love. That I think these stories, these letters, and the artwork are, for me, they're an expression of love. Like Tolkien loves his kids, and you know, if you look at the background to Tolkien, his father died when he was very young. You know, he was the British family that were living in South Africa. Tolkien moved back to England with his mother, and his father died before he could come back, died of rheumatic fever. And then tragically, his mother dies when he's 12 years old. She had type 1 diabetes, which was back before the discovery of insulin, or a way to manufacture insulin. And if you had type 1 diabetes back then, you died in your early 30s. That was pretty much what happened. And she died. And so he was orphaned by the age of 12 and lived in various boarding houses for most of his teenage years. Actually met his wife, his future wife, in a boarding house. Edith, his wife, who, she was an Anglican, he was Catholic. He was not allowed to have a relationship with her. And there's a long story, beautiful story actually, about how he eventually managed to persuade her family that it was okay to marry him. It's a story that parallels the story of Beren and Luthien, if you're familiar with that tradition in the mythology. So you can see that when Tolkien has a family, this is everything to him. He loves these kids, and he writes to them with such tenderness and generosity. He's a busy university professor, but he's taking time out to write these letters, to make these paintings, to make the envelopes. There's times, certain years, where he's late. The letter arrives after Christmas, and you can tell he's probably like, he was just snowed under, literally, with work and you know, but he still makes that effort. And there's something so beautifully loving and caring and tender about these lessons. Now, the point is, if we can just hold that side there, my point this morning is not to believe in Father Christmas or Santa Claus. It's not even necessary, you know, study these texts, because there's deep wisdom in them, although they are beautiful, they're lovely, but rather looking at, okay, so these very issues, I think, are really what the Christmas story is all about. This Christmas story is full of wonder. It's full of mundane, difficult, harsh reality, right? The fact that a poor family have to make a journey to Bethlehem, to their historical hometown, or the historical hometown of the husband, because some megalomaniac has made an edict that, you know, for taxation purposes, that they're going to take a census. And I mean, talk about inconvenient and difficult and hard. And then, you know, there's the whole journey there. There's no room at the inn. There's all of those sort of difficult, harsh, dark elements. But then coming into all that, we have angels, we have stars, we have the beauty and wonder of the story of Christmas coming into all that darkness, coming into all that sort of clinical, this is harsh reality. Something else breaks in. And we have innocence, because it's almost like I wonder, did everybody see the angels? Or was it just the shepherds? Because somehow there's an innocence about the shepherds, a lowliness, if you like, about the shepherds. That mean they're open. And that we see that a lot in Jesus's teachings, even, like, you know, those who have ears to hear, let them hear. In other words, sometimes we can't hear things, we can't see things, because we're too full of ourselves. We're too full of control or desire for control. And when we don't have any control, and when we're in the situation of the shepherds, when we're in a difficult situation, we're more open. We're more open to wonder. We're more open to magic, if you like. The innocence of Jesus. So when we say, or when the angels say, the Son of God is being born, and this is good news, that Son of God is the name that was used for Caesar, the title used for Caesar. Good news was the proclamation of the birth of Caesar, the rule of Caesar. So into the counteract to that is a little baby. It's an innocent little baby. It's as though innocence wins. Innocence is the way. Of course, the power of Rome will be, thank you for your innocence, will crush you. But the wonder is that actually this innocence does not get crushed. This innocence actually triumphs. And that's the third point there of hope, that the birth of Jesus brings hope to the nations, that there is another way, that love, the final point, does triumph. Love does work. Love is possible. That it's possible for that magic, the magic of love, the magic of the kingdom of God, if you like, to prevail. I mean, that's as wondrous as somebody dropping down your chimney at night and leaving gifts at the end of your bed, right? That's the cultural thing we celebrate, or the cultural thing we revel in and have fun with is just a mere reflection of the wonder of the fact that love can change the universe. And that's what Christmas is about. So let's just look at a few scriptures before you think I've totally gone off the deep end and I'm only reading letters from Father Christmas on a Sunday morning. Let's just look at some some scriptures. This one from John 1, and I'm going to read it, and you could read along with it, or you could just close your eyes and receive it. But let's I don't want to make too much comment on this other than let's open ourselves to wonder, to the wonder of another world breaking into ours, or perhaps looking at it another way, our eyes being open to a much bigger reality that we haven't been able to see before. Let's listen to what the first chapter of John says. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. There was a man sent from God, whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify concerning that light, so that through him all might believe. He himself was not the light. He came only as a witness to the light. The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. He was in the world. And though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision or of a husband's will, but born of God. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. John testified concerning him. He cried out, saying, "This is the one I spoke about when I said, he who comes after me has surpassed me because he was before me. Out of his fullness, we have all received grace in place of grace already given. For the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, but the one and only Son, who is himself God, as in closest relationship with the Father, has made him known." I think you see there this sense of wonder, right? So grace and truth comes into the world, but many don't recognize it. Many can't see it. Many can't hear it. But those that do, it's transforming. And there's a sense of, I think here again, of innocence, of, are we willing to believe that? Can we embrace that? Are we willing to embrace that reality? And I think Christmas time is a time where we come back to rechecking our cynicism, recalibrating issues like innocence and hope. In Matthew's gospel, Jesus, if we go sort of move fast forward beyond Jesus's birth to Jesus beginning his ministry, it says this: when Jesus heard that John had been put in prison, he withdrew to Galilee, leaving Nazareth. He went and lived in Capernaum, which was by the lake of the area Zebulun and Naphtali, to fulfill what was said through the prophet Isaiah. Land of Zebulun and land of Naphtali, the way of the sea beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles. The people living in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of the shadow of death, a light has dawned. And then he goes on to, the narrative goes on to say, from that time on, Jesus began to preach, repent, for the kingdom of heaven has come near, or the kingdom of heaven is at hand. In other words, there's this, Jesus is saying, reach out, open your eyes, change your mind, open your mind. There's a new reality. There's a reality that perhaps has always been there. You know, as the John passage said, you know, grace upon grace. It's not like it's necessarily even a new thing. It's just a new understanding, a new appreciation of a new reality, or a reality that's always that has always existed. And the call is to be open-minded, reach out. It's at hand, and that seems to be what Christmas is about. Like that's the willingness, the innocence, if you like, to embrace what we can't necessarily fully see, or we can't necessarily fully understand, but we dare to believe it. In later on in Matthew's gospel, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, you have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. We read this so many times, don't we? But so simple, yet so hard. You have heard that it was said, love your enemy and love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. So if you like, to me, this is the magic, right? This is what the wonder's all about. This is grace and truth breaking into our reality. It's love your neighbor and love your enemy. Jesus is saying there's this way, which is, well, love people you like. That sounds pretty reasonable, but the world's not going to change like that. If you love people you like and choose to love your enemies, that's a new kind of magic. Right? That's something that can transform the world. And it seems that you need a certain level of childlike innocence to even entertain that. Because everything in us is, no, you need to defeat your enemies. No, you need to, we need a scheme, a tactic to dehumanize our enemies, so to justify ourselves and our actions towards them. Jesus isn't saying you won't have enemies, right? He's actually saying, yes, you will have enemies. You'll have people you disagree with, who you need to and should do stand up against, speak out against. Enemies is a reality. The difference here is you're not going to dehumanize. You're going to still love those people that you disagree with. You're going to still love those people that you stand against. And that's radical. It's simple, but so hard to put into practice. It seems like you need a childlike wonder to embrace that kind of life. And in our final scripture here, Jesus gets at this, I think. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? He called a little child to him and placed the child among them. And he said, truly, I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you'll never enter the kingdom of heaven. We'll just leave it at that for now. I don't think Jesus is saying that's not condemnatory. You'll never get into the kingdom of heaven. It's just like, you can't really see the kingdom of heaven unless you have childlike innocence, not naivety, not dumbing things down, or I don't think Jesus is saying we need to become childish, but childlike. It's that same wonder and innocence that Tolkien is tapping into and working with in his letters from Father Christmas. And that innocence, it seems like the whole spiritual journey is one of innocence. We begin as innocent children in this life. And there's a beauty about that innocence. But it is at the same time, in some respects, somewhat naive. And then we get hurt. right? We get hurt in life. Stuff happens to us. We do stuff to other people. And then we become a bit more cynical. We become more jaded. We become more cautious. We decide we need to control our environment and other people a little bit more. We need to control ourselves more. And that can lead to dark places, to a cynical way of life. And it seems like the spiritual journey and the journey Jesus is leading us into is it possible to move from innocence, to get hurt, to live in this dark world and rediscover a different kind of innocence, a kind of innocence that is willing to make sacrifices, a kind of innocence that's willing to love not just people we like, but people we don't like, and love our enemies. That's, I think, the invitation of Jesus to us. That's what's somehow, that's the magic, if you like, of Christmas, that there is another way. There's hope that there is another way. There's hope that this way of love really works, because there's so many reasons to disregard it, so many reasons to let it go. And life takes its toll of us. If you think about it, just even annually, over the months, life takes its toll. And Christmas brings us back, I think, to this place of wonder, rediscovery of innocence, rediscovery of hope, or reignition of hope, and a determination that we will and can love. And that is all because of the reality that we are loved, that we are deeply loved. So we're going to light the Advent candles now. And then we'll move into a time of response, a time of communion. We have gluten-free crackers and fruit juice at the front here and in the middle. We do this every week. Please, when I indicate, come forward and serve one another, or take crackers and fruit juice back to your seats. We have other ways to respond. You can write out prayers under the banner's journey and grow. A prayer that may be just a heart cry for in the present moment, or it might be a prayer request, and we'll pray for you during the week. There's candles you can light at the back, and there's a station for Ukraine at the back too, which we're keeping going. So lots of opportunities to respond. But right now, we're going to focus on the Advent candles. And last week, we lit the candle that represented hope. So I'm going to relight that one. And today, we're actually going in a slightly different order to how we normally do it. We're going to light the candle that represents love, because that's the theme today. That's our Advent theme for the day. And so just for a moment, and you might want to just close your eyes. Maybe we can just put the lights down a little bit, Greg. And you may just want to close your eyes, or you could focus on this flame and what it represents, which is light shining in the darkness, but also it's love burning in the universe, if you like. It's the love of God for us, and love that we can extend to others. And we're just going to take a moment of silence before we go into communion, where I encourage you just to stop for a moment and let the magic, let the wonder of love, the fact that we are loved, that's what Christmas is about. It's love coming into the world. Let the wonder of that just sink and soak into you, just for a few moments, because we're running around. We've got all kinds of things on our agendas. We've got all kinds of voices in our head that tell us that we're not good enough, that we've got to get this done to prove our worth. We've got to outdo that person, or what does that person think about us? I had an argument this morning. How am I going to resolve that? We have all these different things going on in our minds. And for a moment right now, in this safe place, we can just let all that go. So I encourage you, either look at the flame or close your eyes, and let's just breathe God's love in with your in-breath. And let it center you. Let the reality of that love center you. Like, that's what's real. God is love. God is here. God is real. God is true. God is grace. As we breathe in, let's center ourselves on that reality. And as we breathe out, let's just shed fear, cynicism, bravado, control. Breathe in God's love and center yourself on that. And let go of all those other things. God, as we sing at this time of year, we say, O come, Emmanuel. We say that knowing that you are already here within us, with us, around us. But we so easily forget. We so easily get pulled off center. So as we also sing, be born in us today. May the innocence of new birth, of childhood, be our reality. To receive love with no qualms, no suspicion, and to give it with no conditions. So let's stay in that prayerful place and then respond as you see fit. Come whenever you're ready, come take communion or move around. We're going to sing a song together. You may just want to stay in your seat, and that's totally fine as well. Either way, let's just respond to love.